I loathed myself when I saw how blind I'd been about it all, about you and about our child and everything. I tried to think out what kind of a lack it is in me that makes me so that I can't go straight off with you and leave Glastonbury. For I can't do it, my sweet. I thought of doing it last night just before dawn, hours after Penny had gone away. I thought of making father give me money and taking the train with you to London. Imagine us getting into that train. I could even see how that little shanty would look as the train pulled out where John Crow works. But when I thought of it now, I knew, all in a moment, that I couldn't do it. I grew cold and paralyzed, like in dreams, when I took the first step. But I want to tell you this, Nell. His voice dropped to a solemn whisper. When I thought of us getting into the train, I thought of us as three. So you see, though I haven't got that nerve, I've got something. Oh, Nell, I've been so unhappy these last days. I don't know why I tell you. What's the use of telling you? You who have to bear it all. But I've been very unhappy that I thought I could be. I've been torn in two betweens, you and Christ, and it's made me very unhappy. I knew I'd have to bear a lot for him if I let him take me, but I never thought it would be anything like this. My poor sweet Sam, come back to me, the girl whispered, cuddling close up to him in the hay and clinging to his elbow. Now, it's going to be one of those times where I'm limping over every word, I can just tell. Oh. I can't, Nell, he groaned. I can't. Christ has got me by the throat, by the hair of my head. If he made me come to you tonight, he would pull me back to him. I can't escape from him. He's going to hold me tighter and tighter all my life. Sam shuddered as he uttered these words. With the warmth of her body against his as they lay side by side in the soft hay, his nature was so stirred within him that a blasphemous fury seized him with the being who was causing him and his love so much suffering. No, he's got me, my darling, my sweet, my only love. He's got me, and there's no help for it. Sam, stop. I can't let you talk like this. It's the devil you're talking about, not Christ. Christ would never want to separate people who love each other as we do. Sam tore himself from her embrace, and scrambled up upon his feet. She saw him outlined dark against the doorway. His figure seemed to contort into twists, as with frightened eyes she stared at him. Never want to separate us? You don't know him, Nell. He's a lover, I tell you. A lover. A lover. He almost shouted these words at her as she lay there on the ground. Then he swung round and stood at the doorway. The evening of this perfect May day was of a loveliness comparable with the hours that had preceded it. In certain subtle respects, it was even more beautiful, just as in certain ways sleep is more beautiful than waking and death than life. But into the loveliness of this evening, Sam Decker poured the bitterness of his heart. He beat his hands on his head and then stretched out his arms with his fist clenched. A lover, that's what you are, a lover. A cruel lover. Nell was not a particularly nervous girl. She took Sam's excitement for a sort of religious madness, as it very likely may have been, but she felt vibrant concern for him. In fact, she forgot for the moment the brutality of his desertion of her and her anxiety for him. He could not have selected a better psychological trick in order to make his treatment of her tolerable, and it may well be, such is the labyrinthine subtlety of the human mind, that mingled with the genuine anguish of his frustrated passion, there was a thin thread of awareness in him that to stipulate more than he actually felt was the best way of distracting her from his own suffering. Beyond the dark figure of her equivocal lover, leaning sullenly now against one of the doorposts of their shed, she caught sight of the evening star. This luminous planet hung low above the place where the sun had sunk. And as when her love was first menaced by Zoyland's outbursts on the evening when father and son had come to White Lake, This planet had cast its spell upon her. So now, once more, this great being, the one which, after the sun and the moon, holds the highest place among the heavenly bodies, dominated her troubled consciousness and held her attention, until she was aware of a sort of comfort coming from its beauty as it floated there in that greenish-colored ocean of space. But although she knew it not, and in all likelihood the great planet knew it not, there flowed forth from this swimmer in that far-off greenish sea a magical influence which soothed the girl as soon as it touched her, and brought her a faint return of hope. After the sun and the moon, but as long way before the other lords of the sky, whether planets or constellations, this great luminary, either as evening star or morning star, has gathered to itself the worship of the generations. Feeling its power upon her now, though not knowing what it was she was feeling, Nell got up from her hay couch, brushed her clothes mechanically, and came over to where Sam was. There they stood together, staring at the dying glow in that greenish sky and at the increased size and brilliance of that solitary star. She put her hand on his shoulder, and he let it remain there. The evening itself gathered them into its own universal and primordial sadness, the sadness of all lost chances and lost causes since history began. Under the power of that moment, of the slow dying of that unequal day, these two and their child within her did indeed become a conscious three, as he had imagined. But the third was more than a child. The liquid immensity of that hushed twilight enlarged that little embryonic identity into something overshadowing and mysterious, something that became the premonitory presence of that unknown future which was before them both. On its soft muffled wings, this embodiment of their fate flew across their vision, its silent flight pressing down still more, like the fall of a handful of feathers from the brooding breast of the night itself, the lowered pulse of the earth's huge swing into darkness. There came over Nell's mind the slow, faint intimation that it would be useless to struggle any more to bind Sam to her side. As she leaned against his shoulder now in her tragic acquiescence, she felt that this was the moment in her life when she must gather her forces together and accept her destiny, struggle no more against it, but adjust herself to it as best she might. Always would be she loved the strange man by her side, so much older in his troubled thoughts than he was in inexperienced years. But her love must accept the hint of this largely expanded, fragrant twilight, darkening slowly, tenderly, solemnly before her eyes, smelling vaguely of primroses and moss. "Sam," she whispered softly. He turned his discomforted face towards her, and she seemed in that obscure light to detect upon it a pitiful appeal to her that she should have mercy upon him and not drive him to desperation, not compel him to struggle to do what it was beyond his nature to do. "Sam," she repeated, "you shall do exactly what you want. Oh, my darling, oh, my poor Sam. It's more than I can bear to see you so troubled. Our love has been very sweet to me." Her voice trembled a little, but it did not break. "But it must accept what it has come to it, and so it shall be. You have changed my life. In my heart I shall be always yours and never anyone else's." He made no answer, but she heard him swallow down a queer sort of half-animal sob. And that's the end of chapter Mayday. Now we begin presently the next chapter, Omens and Oracles. Oracles. Matt Decker was right when he said that a town which has had so long any historical continuity as Glastonbury requires a personality of its own. Let me do that again. Matt Decker was right when he said that a town which has had so long an historic continuity as Glastonbury acquires a personality of its own. And just as in human organisms there are slowly developed changes, sometimes maladies, sometimes regenerations, which take place under the surface and then at a crisis burst out into prominence, So does it happen with any community as old and intricate as this one. Individual agencies help to bring about these upheavals, but the preparation for them is a long, silent, hidden growth, subject quite as much to the influence of non-human forces as to the will of humanity. Old Dr. Fell and his sister Barbara were to dine at Abbey House one day early in June, to be exact on June the 2nd, and when this day came, there was the usual fuss and stir all over the rambling, untidy dwelling where, for some 50 years, the brother and sister had lived at the corner of North Lode Street and Manor House Road. Though the Fells had lived here so long, it was notorious that their successive batches of maids only stayed with them for very limited periods. Such was the cantankerous and testily disposition of Miss Barbara Fell. Thus, when any day arrived for real dining out, and this came only some half a dozen times a year, the doctor's best dress tie and Miss Barbara's best piece of black lace, and sometimes even her tiger claw brooch set in opals, were apt to be in the wrong drawer or in the wrong chest of drawers. Dr. Fell took the precaution of this occasion of being dressed a complete hour before it was necessary. He had learned by bitter experience that it was advisable that the dressing difficulties of the two of them would not occur simultaneously. Dr. Fell, in this crafty manner, took upon himself to outwit the malevolence of Hobbitants, the demon of cursed households. And so now he sat in his receiving room, awaiting the forward glide of events and reading the Tritium of Epictetus. Dr. Fell was not unaware that he lived in a town which had a very ancient Christian church. He had indeed only to ascend the eastern slope of Wirral Hill to discover, set up by this town council, when while its predecessor was mayor, a handsomely inscribed marble slab upon which was recorded the fact that, 31 years after the death of our Savior, Joseph of Arimathea brought his blood to the spot. Dr. Fell was also in a position to discover in the guidebooks the fact that not only was the church in his town the oldest church, Orbis Terrarum, in the whole earth, but that this fact had been sustained against rival churches at the Council of Pisa in 1409, at the Council of Constance in 1417, at the Council of Siena in 1424, and at the Council of Basile in 1434, establishing beyond refutation that Glastonbury possessed a church that had been founded statim post passionis Christi, immediately after the Passion of Christ. Nevertheless, although he denied not that he lived in a town where perhaps an altar still existed that had been used in the original wattle edifice, built by one who had touched the flesh of the man-god, Dr. Fell was not a Christian. He was, on the contrary, a Stoic, and when he was not reading of the thousandth time the sturdy logi of the stoical slave, he was reading for the 100th time the wistful meditations of the stoical emperor. "Manny! Manny!" It was Barbara's voice ringing through the house. He was Manny. His name was really Charles Montague. Manny had been a nursery nickname, and since it reduced his dignity more completely than anything else, his sister was never tired of using it. He really got up and opened the door. "Tell Rosie I want her, Manny." He made 3 or 4 steps to the stairs and then went down to the basement where the kitchen was at and opened the door. "Rosie," he called. "Yes, doctor. Your mistress wants you." Back he came to his study and again sat down. This time he closed the Intradion and flung it on his desk. Once more in this warm, dusty June sunshine, his head sank down over his knees, and he thought how his sister had managed to spoil the whole of his life. He thought to himself, "What on earth have I lived for all these years? I've not really enjoyed myself, I suppose, on the average, for more than a single hour every day. An hour a day. I wonder how many more than just most people in Glastonbury I get, when you add up their pleasant moments. I can't believe I've held back from those morphine tablets for an hour a day. No, it's the hope that keeps me going on, just going on. But that's all it is. It's the hope." But what he always thought of in his mind as the hope, the doctor meant nothing less than the death of his sister Barbara. "Manny! Manny!" Out of his chair he sprang again, and out of his study he flew. Once in the passage, he waited for a second, praying that she was only having a row with Rosie, and that calling for him was a strategic move in a feminine battle. Manny. Yes, Barbara? Oh, don't say yes in that tone. She was leaning over the banisters. Come up, quick. Come here. Come here. You must hook me up. Rosie is too helpless for anything. Dr. Fell sighed heavily and began mounting the stairs. Weariness and a great disgust for life weighed upon him. He followed Barbara into her bedroom, even across the threshold of which was a purgatorial punishment to him, and as he hooked her up, his loathing for her was so intense that the idea of murder came into his mind. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you again, I hope. Cheers.